Back in October of 2021, Mark Zuckerberg stood on a stage and told the world he was changing the name of his company. He was pivoting the entire direction of the business. Facebook was over, Meta was born, and the Metaverse was going to be the next chapter of the internet. Zuckerberg described a fully immersive virtual world where billions of people would live, work, and socialize every single day, and he committed $10 billion a year to build it. The question worth asking is how the flagship product of that vision ended up with only about 38 active users in a single session at its peak. That's exactly what this story is about. To understand why Zuckerberg made such a massive bet, you have to look at what was actually happening to Facebook in 2021. The company was under serious pressure, and the walls were closing in from several directions at once. Apple had just released a privacy update that allowed iPhone users to opt out of the cross-app tracking that Facebook's entire advertising business depended on to function. For years, Facebook had been able to follow users across the internet, collecting behavioral data from third-party apps and websites to build detailed profiles that made its ad targeting extraordinarily precise. That was the core of the business model, the reason advertisers paid premium rates for Facebook placements over almost any other digital channel. The Apple update gave users the ability to say no to all of that with a single tap, and the majority of them did exactly that. The change made Facebook's ad targeting far less precise overnight, and advertisers began pulling their budgets back almost immediately. The company lost roughly $10 billion in projected revenue in the first year alone from that one update, a staggering hit to a business that had been built almost entirely around the precision of its data. At the same time, Congress kept calling Zuckerberg in to testify. Senators were demanding answers about misinformation, about how the algorithm worked, and about whether the platform was contributing to mental health problems among teenagers. Even when those hearings veered into political theater, the regulatory pressure was real and it was not going away. Internally, leaked research suggesting the company had known about certain harms and chosen not to act on them made those congressional appearances even more damaging to the company's public standing. On top of all that, younger audiences were migrating to TikTok faster than Instagram's short-form video features could compete with. And the gap between where those users were going and where Facebook was trying to hold them was widening every quarter. The regulatory burden and the audience shift were both accelerating the problem. Zuckerberg was looking at a business with a shrinking competitive edge, a damaged advertiser relationship, and a growing regulatory headache. Rather than address those problems one at a time, he declared that the entire landscape was changing and that Meta would be the company to build the next version of the digital world. The October 2021 rebrand was framed publicly as a bold new vision rather than a response to mounting pressure, and he backed it up by committing $10 billion a year to Reality Labs, the internal division responsible for turning that vision into something real. The flagship product coming out of Reality Labs was Horizon Worlds, a virtual reality social platform built for the Quest headset. The concept was that users could hang out with friends, attend virtual concerts, explore user-built environments, and hold work meetings inside a shared digital space. Basically everything you would do in real life, accessed through a headset and rendered as a cartoon virtual world. Zuckerberg described virtual offices where remote teams could collaborate as if they were in the same room, virtual storefronts where creators could sell digital goods, and social hubs where strangers from across the world could meet and interact. The pitch borrowed heavily from science fiction, specifically the kind of fully realized digital universe that writers had been imagining for decades. When Zuckerberg posted the early demos publicly, they were met with immediate skepticism. He appeared as a blocky cartoon avatar inside a virtual office, shaking hands with another digital character. The graphics looked like something from a mid-2000s video game. One detail stood out above everything else. The avatars had no legs. They simply stopped existing from the waist down. The image became a meme almost instantly, and it set the tone for how the public would receive the product going forward. Zuckerberg said the leg issue would eventually be fixed, but those floating torsos became a recurring symbol for critics and a shorthand for everything that felt unfinished about the platform. They pointed to something deeper, a product that was nowhere near the grand vision being sold to the public. None of that skepticism slowed the spending down. Engineers were being hired by the thousands, and investors were told to think in decades rather than quarters, which gave the project a kind of protective shell where any outside criticism could be dismissed as short-term thinking. Inside the company, though, the people actually building Horizon Worlds were starting to notice a problem that no amount of long-term framing could explain away. In July of 2022, The Verge published a series of internal meta documents that told a very different story than the one being pitched to the public. The findings showed that Meta's own employees were not using Horizon Worlds. These were people getting paid to build the platform, sitting through endless internal meetings about growth targets, and they were not logging in voluntarily on their own time. A memo from a vice president level leader inside the Metaverse division admitted in writing that the platform was too buggy and frustrating to use on a regular basis, describing it as simply not fun. When someone that senior puts that kind of assessment of their own product into a company document, it reflects a product problem that goes well beyond a few technical glitches waiting to be patched. The memo went further than just cataloging technical complaints. It pointed out that the development team needed to genuinely fall in love with Horizon before they could ever expect an outside user to do the same. And the evidence suggested that passion just was not there. The people building this virtual world were not spending their evenings inside it or showing it off to their families on weekends. They were clocking out and doing something else entirely. When a product cannot hold the attention of the people being paid to care about it, the problem runs deeper than any marketing campaign or press event can fix. The official user numbers told the same story from a clinical angle. Meta had originally set a goal of reaching 500,000 monthly active users by the end of 2022. Halfway through the year, leadership slashed that target to 280,000. The platform still could not reach even that reduced number, but the monthly figure actually masked a much lonelier reality at the level of individual spaces within the platform. Internal data revealed that during peak hours, some individual worlds within Horizon Worlds had fewer than 50 people in them at once. A user could put on a Quest headset, enter a Horizon world, and find themselves completely alone with nobody to interact with. Horizon Worlds had opened to the public in December of 2021, meaning the drop-off in engagement happened within the first 6 months. People tried the experience, decided it was not worth their time, and never came back. The retention curve looked less like a gradual decline and more like a cliff that everyone fell off after their very first session. Independent creators who were supposed to function as the platform's equivalent of YouTube or Roblox builders saw the same pattern play out in their own spaces. Meta's pitch was that Horizon Worlds would become a place where people built environments and attracted audiences the way content creators do on other platforms. The company even launched a creator fund to seed development and encourage people to invest their time in building. Some creators took that seriously and put in genuine effort, building game rooms, art galleries, social hangout spaces, and interactive experiences that were technically impressive given the platform's limitations. But without a steady flow of visitors coming through, those spaces just sat empty for days and weeks at a time. A creator might log in and find their world had received fewer than 10 visitors since they last updated it. The economics didn't work, the audience wasn't there, and the motivation to keep building evaporated quickly. Creators eventually stopped updating their worlds or deleted them entirely, leaving behind abandoned rooms in a massive platform that nobody was choosing to visit. By the middle of 2022, the internal tone at Meta had shifted noticeably away from aggressive growth targets. Leadership was focused on stabilizing what already existed rather than scaling toward hundreds of millions of users anytime soon. The deeper problem was that the budget had nothing to do with the platform's actual performance. Horizon Worlds was being funded because Zuckerberg had decided the metaverse was the future, and that decision came with a price tag that didn't adjust itself based on usage data. The numbers were pointing in one direction while the spending was heading in the other, and that gap was about to get much wider and much more expensive. Reality Labs reported a $10.2 billion loss in 2021, the same year the metaverse was announced to the world. In 2022, those losses climbed to $13.7 billion. By 2023, the number reached $16.1 billion. By the end of that year, Reality Labs had burned through more than $47 billion in total losses since becoming its own division. Some analysts estimated the real figure was closer to $80 billion when the cost of data centers, hardware research programs, and the salaries of tens of thousands of engineers were factored in. To put that in context, $47 billion in losses over 3 years with no clear path to profitability is unlike almost anything else in the history of corporate technology spending. The logical response to numbers that clear would have been to reduce the budget and acknowledge that the timing was off. In early 2023, Zuckerberg announced what he called the Year of Efficiency, signaling a leaner and more focused company going forward. He talked about flattening management layers, cutting low-priority projects, and returning the company to the scrappy, fast-moving culture that had defined its early years. Investors quickly noticed that Reality Labs was entirely exempt from those cuts. The division responsible for the company's largest losses kept its budget intact, while every other part of the organization was told to tighten up and do more with less. Meta cut 11,000 jobs in November of 2022, about 13% of its total workforce, then cut another 10,000 people the following spring. These weren't abstract headcount reductions, they represented real teams, long-tenured employees, and entire functions that had been central to how the company operated. Employees in advertising, recruiting, data science, and core business operations lost their livelihoods while the Metaverse division remained untouched. People who had spent years building the revenue engine that funded the company's growth were let go while the division spending more money than any other continued without interruption. That contrast was genuinely difficult to justify from any conventional business standpoint, and it left a significant number of people inside the company with hard questions that leadership never fully answered. The hardware side of Reality Labs wasn't delivering the momentum the overall strategy needed. While the Quest 2 sold reasonably well as a gaming device and found a comfortable niche among VR enthusiasts, it never became the mainstream consumer product that Zuckerberg needed to validate his central argument about a new computing platform. The Quest Pro launched in late 2022, positioned as a high-end device for enterprise and professional users, carrying a price tag of $1,500. It sold so poorly that Meta slashed the price by hundreds of dollars within months and ultimately discontinued it entirely. The business world it was aimed at simply wasn't willing to pay that kind of premium for hardware without a well-established workflow or a proven productivity case behind it. The failure of the Quest Pro was significant because enterprise adoption had always been part of the argument for why the metaverse would eventually justify its costs, and that market had clearly said no. Engineers who were working there during this period described a genuinely strange atmosphere, building features for a platform they didn't believe in, developing social tools and virtual event systems for a product that the internal data consistently showed was nearly empty. Many tried to transfer to other divisions within the company. Others kept building things they understood wouldn't be widely used, because that was the job. By the time quarterly earnings calls came around, shareholders had stopped asking optimistic questions about the long-term future and were pushing for specifics. What was the exit strategy, and what measurable metrics would demonstrate that $80 billion was generating any return at all? Zuckerberg's answers consistently returned to the concept of patient capital and the idea that building a new computing platform takes considerable time. That framing had been consistent since 2021. And after 3 years of compounding losses with no inflection in the user numbers, repeating a long-term vision without tangible evidence of traction was becoming harder for the investment community to absorb. Toward the end of 2023, a clear shift in Zuckerberg's public language became apparent. The word Metaverse started appearing less frequently in his remarks, until it was largely absent from his vocabulary altogether. Earnings calls that had previously opened with major updates on virtual reality began leading with artificial intelligence, Meta's investment in large language models, its Llama releases, and the AI assistants being integrated across Instagram and WhatsApp. Zuckerberg started talking about Meta AI as a product that could reach more people than any other AI assistant in the world, simply because it was embedded in platforms that already had billions of active users. The competitive framing shifted entirely. The company was no longer racing to build a new world, but positioning itself against OpenAI, Google, and Anthropic in a battle for AI dominance. The energy of the company's public identity moved decisively toward that competition, without any formal announcement that the Metaverse vision had been retired. It just quietly stopped being the thing Zuckerberg led with when he wanted to talk about the future. Horizon Worlds did receive a visual update that finally gave the avatars legs, resolving the most widely mocked detail from the platform's early days. The user numbers stayed flat because the core issue was the experience itself. Putting on a headset simply wasn't worth the friction for most people, and resolving an animation problem didn't change that calculation. The way Meta now describes Reality Labs has changed significantly as well. Rather than positioning it as the engine driving the company's next chapter, the division is described as long-term research and development with a time horizon of 10 to 15 years. The original announcement was pitching a civilization-scale social platform that billions of people would inhabit. What remained was a decade-long research project with no clear consumer story attached to it. Those are two fundamentally different things, and the distance between them represents $80 billion that the company still has not fully accounted for. Horizon Worlds still exists today, and Meta continues selling Quest headsets to anyone who wants one. But the product that prompted a company to rename itself after a virtual world no longer commands the attention of the people who staked the company's identity on its success. The money was spent, the engineers were hired, the demos were posted, and somewhere along the way, the vision quietly became a research initiative. What remains is a $47 billion question about what was actually built, who is using it, and whether any of it was worth the cost. And that question still does not have a clean answer. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe for more stories like this one.